All right, chat. How are we doing today? We are doing inverse fractions today. Sorry about that. Been feeling a little bit on the sick side, so last week I had to miss because the whole family wasn't feeling well. But we are back tonight with Math Man Mondays, and today we are presenting inverse functions. And we're going to do this kind of like in a procedural way that hopefully will go well. So we're going to talk about a few steps to look at, and then it's really just going to be those same steps for every single problem. And we're going to work through a few problems. And per usual, if you have questions and you're in the chat, feel free to ask questions. If you are watching this in the highlights on Twitch, or if you have questions via YouTube, always feel free to hit me up and I will happily answer those questions for you. And there are links for those below. So let's get it going. So the first thing about inverse functions is we have steps we have to think about. And those steps, really there's about 6 of them. And with those 6 steps, so we're talking about, all right, so steps. For finding an inverse function. All right, so you have steps for this. Step 1. Fun fact is make sure it is a function. We do this via vertical line test. And then after that, we go to step 2, and needs to be 1, 2, 1. And what this means is horizontal line test. So just basically the opposite of vertical. It's a perpendicular line to that. And then we get to start with the actual mathematical steps where we're going to be doing things. You want to change, so change f of x to y. Step 4, swap x and y. Step 5, solve for y. Step 6, change y to f inverse of x. All right, this seems like a lot of different things you have to do. It's really not that bad. But these are the 6 steps that we are going to use. All right, so we're going to make sure our functions are passing vertical line test, that they are a function. If we're given a function that where it says f of x, it's going to be a function. There's no reason it shouldn't be. Then you need to be 1-to-1, so you have to pass horizontal line test. If you do not pass horizontal line test, then you still go through steps 3, 4, 5, and 6. And once you find step 6, so you find your inverse, you have to restrict the domain. We'll look at one of those as well. Then you're going to go in and you change f of x to y, solve it for y, just going through your algebra manipulation. Once you solve for y, change your y to f inverse of x. Easy peasy, nothing too crazy. So let's start off with an easy problem so we can kind of see what we're talking about. And the first type of problem that we're going to see, and we're going to talk about, is a linear function. So we want to find the inverse of f of x equals 5x minus 2. And when we do that, so if we think about 5x minus 2, that means it's rising 5 running over 1. It keeps doing that. That's going to pass vertical line test. That's going to pass horizontal line test. So vertical line test is a check, and horizontal line test is a check. So in other words, VLT will be vertical line test, HLT will be horizontal line test. Then we get to start in our steps. So we're going to change f of x to y. So y equals 5x minus 2. That was our first thing we had to do. So make a little bullet there that we did that. The next thing that we need to do is we need to swap our x and y. So we're going to make that x is equal 5y minus 2. Once that happens, we start solving for our y. And the first thing we're going to do to solve for y is we're going to add 2 to both sides. So we plus 2 and plus 2. That gives us x plus 2 is equal to 5y. And if you're still solving for y, then you have x plus 2 over 5 is equal to y. And then finally, our last step. Sorry, I need to get more colored markers for this. Our last step over here is we're going to change that. So we now have x plus 2 over 5 equals f inverse of x. And we're done. Nothing too crazy about it. There is a check method, like if you want to check to make sure you found the right solution. So if you want to check, and in most cases you're not going to do this, but let's go ahead and block this off real quick. If you want to check, so checking your answer, check answer. To check your answer, you're going to do f of f inverse of x. In order to do that, we're going to really take f, and our f inverse of x was x plus 2 over 5. And we're just going to substitute that in. And as long as everything cancels out and leaves you with x, then you are good to go. So we're going to do f of, or sorry, we already wrote that. Boop, 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 boop. Ignore that. We're going to have 5 times x plus 2 over 5 minus 2. Well, the 5s are going to cancel out, and you end up with x plus 2. Oops, I'm off screen here. You're going to end up with, so these cancel out since you've substituted this into your function, your original function. So 5s cancel out, and you're with x plus 2 minus 2, and that just leaves you with x. So everything checked out. So as long as everything cancels out and leaves you with x, then you've found the inverse. More often than not, you're not really going to do that. You're not going to go back and check because you can also graph both lines. And if they're perpendicular, then you're good. So you have kind of 2 options for checking. You can check by hand, or you can check in the calculator. All right, so let's look at another function. And again, we followed those 6 steps we talked about earlier, where, let me erase this real quick. We followed the 6 steps we talked about earlier, where we made sure it passed vertical line test. We made sure it passed horizontal line test. And these 2 you can do in a calculator if you have them. You can do it by calculator or by hand. I do it by hand just because I can think about what the graph looks like. But if you need to see the graph, then just graph them in your calculator. That's perfectly fine. Change f of x to y, swap x and y, solve for y, and then change f inverse of x from y that you found. Okay, so let's find the inverse of another function here. And this time we're going to do something probably a little bit more difficult. Whoopsies there. Dropped to something and my camera's not focusing. There we go. That was weird. All right, so this time we're going to find the inverse of, and we'll do f of x is equal to, let's say, x plus 7 over 4. Making these up, so sometimes they work out great, sometimes they don't. All right, if you think about this, you could rewrite this, and it might be worth thinking about that as f of x equals x over 4 plus 7 over 4. And the reason this is important is if you think about this, this is like 1/4 for your slope. So that means you're going to go up 1 over 4, up 1 over 4, and you're going to cross the x-axis or the y-axis at 7/4. So again, that passes vertical line test, and you're going to pass horizontal line test with that. If you don't believe me, like I said before, you can easily graph that in your calculator. But, so now that we know, again, we know vertical line test is a check, horizontal line test is a check, then we are good to go and starting our steps. So again, our first step is just like before. We're going to change f of x to y. So step 1 is going to be y equals x plus 7 over 4. And then, again, we're going to say, okay, well, now we need to swap our x and y. So we're going to end up with x equals y plus 7 over 4. And then we start solving for our new y. So the first thing we want to do is if we have y plus 7 up here, we need to get this 4 out of the denominator, so we're going to multiply. So we end up with 4x is equal to y plus 7. And then we're going to subtract 7 from both sides and get 4x minus 7 equals y. Mission accomplished. That means we just come over here and we say, hey, our last and final step is to change y to f inverse of x. So f inverse of x equals 4x minus 7. All right, and then again, if you want to go check that, please feel free. Like, go plug this in to your original function, make sure everything cancels out and gives you x, and you're good to go. So let's move on to something where we don't pass horizontal line test, and I'll do the most basic example I can, so that way it's really easy to see what's happening and why it doesn't work. So in this case, we're going to pass vertical line test, but we're not going to pass horizontal line test. And whenever that happens, you just keep on going through the problem, but you have to keep that in mind because what you're going to do is called restricting the domain. So we're going to find the inverse of f of x is equal to x squared. And we're going to make a star, and we're going to say restrict the domain. All right, if you don't know what the graph of x squared looks like, it's a parabola. And a parabola is when you have this U shape like this. Oh, that's a terrible U, but it's a U shape. So it would pass vertical line test, but it would fail horizontal line test. And that's important for us because the first two steps that we're given is that vertical line test must work. If vertical line test fails, then we're done with the problem. But if horizontal line test fails, we don't know the alternate method yet. So this time, horizontal line test fails. And we go, okay, well, we still have to follow our basic steps and make y for f of x. So we get y equals x squared. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to say, okay, well, now we swap these out. And if I'm solving for y, I take the square root of each side. And I get the square root of x is equal to y. And then, just like before, I just change y to be f inverse of x. So, move this up a little bit. Square root of x equals f inverse of x. Now, it's really important to understand what's happening with the graphs here. Oops, sorry about that. So I'm going to just draw a generic graph so you can understand. Where I'm going to draw our original function in blue. So we have a parabola. So that's almost good. We have a parabola. It passes vertical line test, but didn't pass horizontal line test. Well, then when you get this inverse, so you have f inverse of x is equal to the square root of x, the square root of x graphs like this. And the domain of that is all real number, or sorry, wow. The domain of your original function is all real numbers. The domain of your inverse function is from 0 to infinity, because you cannot have a negative value under your square root. That will give you an imaginary number, and if you're going over this material, you don't know how to graph imaginary numbers yet. So you have to restrict everything to 0 to infinity. So it's basically getting rid of this half of the parabola. So our new domain that we're going to work with, and if you don't know what domain is the x values that you're working with for your graph. So your domain is going to be from 0 to infinity. If you don't know what the bracket means I can be 0 If there was a parentheses there, it means I can be really close to 0, but not 0 itself. In a quick rundown, domain is all the values that all the x values your graph works for. Range would be all the values your y works for. So for either of these graphs, the range would be 0 to infinity, but the domain for the original function would be all real numbers, and your square root function would be 0 to infinity. The other way you'd sometimes see this written is where you say x is greater than or equal to 0. So if you go back to do the old way of intervals. So this is interval notation. And you can relate this back to probably in like 3rd or 4th grade, you did number lines, and they did open circles, closed circles once you got to algebra with those number lines. So, or even pre-algebra, I guess. So you would take this bracket would be a closed circle on your graph, and the parentheses would be an open circle. But obviously you can't graph infinity because it's a very large number that just keeps on going. But that gives you an idea of kind of what we're working with there. We have one more type of example that comes up that kind of throws people off, but this was restricting the domain, and I really like the restricting the domain problems just because they're slightly different. Okay, so this time we're going to find the inverse of f of x, and we're going to do let's put x in the denominator this time. So like let's do 3 over x plus 6. I don't know how that's going to work. It might work great. It might not. I don't know. We'll find out. So what we're going to do is, I guess I should have brought up a graph of this. Interesting. We're going to assume it works. And then, so in the horizontal line test will be fine. So we're going to go through, and we were starting in red first. So we're going to change f of x to y. It's 3 over x plus 6. And then we're going to swap x and y. X is equal to 3 over y plus 6. And then we're going to start solving for y. Now, we have an issue here of where the whole y is in the denominator, so we have to bring it up. So now we have x times y plus 6 equals 3. And this is where people get thrown for a loop because they're not used to seeing this. You need to distribute the x. Like the x needs to go to be multiplied by the y and the 6. So you're going to distribute because you need to get the y out of those parentheses. And you get xy plus 6x equals 3. And now you're back to solving just like before. This is an algebra equation. You want to solve for y. So you're going to get rid of 6x. And the way to do that is subtract. You're going to subtract 6x from this side, bring it over here. So you have xy is equal to 3 minus 6x. And then you're like, hey, this is multiplication, so I'm going to divide by x. And I get 3 minus 6x over x, and then we're just going to rewrite that as our inverse. So our last step, just per usual, we get f inverse of x is equal to 3 minus 6x over x. You would sometimes see this as 3 over x minus 6, like where they separate the fraction, but either would be an acceptable answer. Okay. That gives you a pretty basic rundown of inverses without getting overly complicated. It does not change if you have squares and cubes and all that stuff. You just need to make sure to do square roots and cube roots. But just stick with it, and it's definitely procedural. If you ever have questions and you want to get more in depth with this, I'll be happy to do that. You can always reach out to me on my Twitter. You can reach out in the comments on YouTube. Or you always stop by if you want to stop by during the Twitch streams. They're generally at 10 p.m. Eastern. The kiddos and the wifey were asleep early tonight, so I went ahead and did the stream an hour earlier than normal. So I'm sorry if you missed it and you had to catch it on YouTube, but I appreciate y'all coming out. If you are interested in these types of boards, let me know. They are Deco marker boards. I have a buddy that works there, and I can give you his contact information. But I appreciate y'all coming out tonight. That's the Mathman Monday Inverse Fractions for this Monday. Hope everybody has a happy Halloween since that's coming up on Thursday. I would like to get a Word Problem Wednesday in sometime soon. I just don't know when it's going to be because Wednesdays are really hectic. But I'm going to stop here for the night and switch over to some gaming. And I'll see you guys here in a bit. And again, I hope you guys have a happy Halloween.